All right, recording is happening. All right, so good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We're going to get things kicked off. Sybil, if you would start, please, could you just tell us a little bit how this book came to fruition?
Oh, sure. I think probably the book was published in 2010. I think everybody that's here knows that I was the local history librarian at what was then called the Estes Park Public Library until 2008. And Arcadia Press, who put this out, has like a gazillion of these books about small towns or events or whatever. And I think they contacted somebody at the museum, probably Betty Kilstunken. She said, no, but I think Sybil would probably do something about it. So that's how I got involved in it. And I was pretty jazzed. I have this whole thing about how we're so interested in Enos Mills and Isabella Bird and all that. We know a lot about what happened 100 years ago, or at least we know what we've made up about what happened 100 years ago, but we don't know a whole lot about what happened from mid-century 1950. And so that's why I was really eager to write this book. And then I was pretty stoked about the way it turned out. And I was like, oh, well, let me do another one. And the Arcadia people said, oh, let's see if it sells, which, I mean, it's not like I'm Stephen King or anybody. I'm not rich yet from the sale of this book. But by the time they got around to thinking that it was doing okay, and there was an interest in it because of the 4 million people who come to Estes Park every year and just want to know something about Estes Park. That was 2013, and I was like, who cares anymore? So they contacted Steve Mitchell, who wrote the follow-up book, which is called Legendary Locals. So as far as I know, there are at least 4 Arcadia books about Rocky Mountain National Park. There's one that is specifically Rocky Mountain National Park. There's one that was postcards of Rocky Mountain National Park. And I think actually Suzanne Silverthorne over on the other side did one about Grand Lake. So there's a lot of interest in this type of book because it's easy to read. It's mostly pictures. You can pick it up, thumb through it, put it back down. Don't have to know anything. So that's kind of the first thing about why I did it or wanted to do it. And maybe before I die, I'll do a follow-up book. Who knows? Anything is possible. I used a lot of photographs from the museum collection, and my friends Jack and Lily Melton, who were at the Y Museum, had lots of pictures. When they moved here in 1980, they collected postcards and photographs and all kinds of things. So that's why a lot of the pictures in there are from them. And I reached out to some other people who don't get a lot of play with what they do with stuff, or older people that had some pictures, like Jody Magnuson, whose son was the chief park ranger for quite a while, who gave me a picture from her family, which is one of my favorite pictures in the book. And Will Sitta, who a lot of people know from Safeway as a cashier, had taken a lot of pictures, and he was kind enough to loan me a lot of his pictures. So I don't know, is there anything else about that? That about covers it, I think.
Perfect, thank you for that. So Sybil, the book is kind of arranged thematically by chapter, like the growth of Estes Park, Colorado Big Thompson Project. Could you kind of tell us a little bit why you decided to feature like a specific photo in a specific chapter? Because there's there's some great overlap too.
Yeah, I wanted to start with nothing, like the first couple pictures are when there was no buildings, just like a field or there were, was one building, the school or something. And Estes Park really became a hot spot with the Colorado Big Thompson Project. All those guys that came and worked on the tunnel were like, wow, this is an incredibly beautiful place. I mean, there had been visitors, of course, with Rocky from 1915 and earlier than that, but that was when people started thinking, I could live there. I could do something and be there. So that's why it goes from the very earliest 1900s pictures and then the Colorado Big Thompson Project. And I don't know, a lot of people don't know what those big tower pylon things are along the road by the lake, or that there's a wonderful book called Last Waterhole in the West, which is about the Colorado Big Thompson Project. And just the whole idea, the older I get, the more I realize that young people don't know where utilities come from, you know, why the light works when you flip the switch, that kind of stuff. So I thought that was important. Yeah, and then just the other, downtown is my favorite thing, just to walk around and see what's changed. And this year, a lot of things are changing downtown, you know, some things that have been there for a really long time. Most of my life, like Indian Village, are going to be something else. So that'll be interesting to see in this new century where we go from that. There's a lot of uproar lately about Mr. Cullen from the Stanley buying the church shops. And, you know, a lot of people never realized that was a church to start with. Why do they call it the church shops? Ugh. Maybe Mr. Church from the chicken place named it. I don't know. So anyway, and, you know, I worked up through like the flood. I wanted, people also don't know that we've had a lot of disasters here, and we have had disasters since the end of this book, which is why we maybe need to do a follow-up book. Sometimes when I look at that, I can't believe that the Long Lake flood was 40 years ago, but that's what old people talk about, Michaela. So there you go.
That's what I talk about too.
Well, yeah, old people and museum professionals.
Yeah, right.
So much in common.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sybil. Thanks for some of that background. Does anybody have any questions or comments right off the bat that they wish to share? Kathleen.
Hi. Yeah. Actually, to tag on to some things you just said, I was surprised that there was only one picture of the Big Thompson flood. I mean, that's hugely important. Why is that?
Well, because of the location of that flood, it didn't really impact the town so much. Not like the Long Lake flood. And I think there are several books about the Big Thompson flood, and probably I couldn't get anything. Maybe I know that was a huge impact on the town, on the fact that nobody could get here except through Allen's Park or over Trail Ridge. Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to know is how you decided where to stop. It seems like maybe around the 1960s, except for the floods, which were in the 1980s. And so did Arcadia tell you where they wanted covered? Like what was his decision process as to where the book would end?
Primarily the number of pages was what that was about. And because, you know, I think the 60s and 70s were the time that I was really most influenced about. I lived here year round, starting in the 70s, and in the 60s, and 50s and 60s, I had just lived here in the summer. But it was more, the Arcadia people were more like, how many pages can you have? And looking at the book now, I think, oh man, I don't know why, like, there's a lot of white space. I kind of like the white space. There are some places that the whole page is covered, but there are a lot of things, I don't know if anybody can see that, like that there's all this white space where I could have probably put another smaller photograph. But yeah, I don't know. Decisions about books, as you know, or about anything that you publish, are in the moment, and you can always do better or different. And that's why I think maybe I should try to do a follow-up of some kind, or somebody should, maybe Michaela should. And You know, Kathleen, thank you for putting up on, I don't know if you were on when I said, I think the only reason some of us are here is because we saw your post on Facebook about it. So thank you. As you can maybe tell from Kathleen's background, she's kind of a writer herself, more than kind of a writer, and also has a lot to do with the history of lions. Here's a question for you. Is there one for lions? Is there an Arcadia book for lions?
Well, we don't have an Arcadia book because we went on our own and did our own books. We have a basic book. It starts in 1880s when the town started and talks about the basic history of the town. Then we have two other books that a man spent 30 years collecting information and even just letters and memoirs. There was really nothing written about lions. And he passed away before he published, and another woman took it over. So there was so much information. We have two books, big books. One of them is more about pictures of the town, and the other one is about people and families and lineage and that kind of thing. And then we have a third book that's almost strictly about the quarries, which is based on videos that I did. As you know, I did about 60 oral histories on videotape of the pioneer families and lions. So we're well covered. and then I wanted to say I really was surprised how little I knew about Estes. I mean, I go to Estes and I've gone to the museum programs, and a lot of those business names I just had never heard of. And one of the things that fascinated me in your book was all the hotels. I had no idea, big, huge hotels back then. The first chapter, I think, almost it seemed like every other picture was a hotel. And then I think chapter 3 or something like that was all hotels. So that was quite interesting. And so now I'm, going back and I'm trying to place the pictures in your book because it didn't, and a lot of times I couldn't pinpoint the picture with the town, and I wish there had been maybe more specific information about where that building was located, like there was some kind of like summer camp, which I kind of figured out was close to the Stanley Hotel, I think. And I said this to someone else who had published a book on hotels, that it would have been cool to have had a map in that book because a lot of them were destroyed or burnt or whatever, and it would be interesting. I know Arcadia doesn't usually do that, but I would have enjoyed it, the information, just because I would love to be able to place, that building, like go on that street and say, oh, that's where the, Antelope Hotel was or whatever, and look at what it is now. As you say, the church is a good example. Though, a lot of people didn't understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
I have a
almost
question,
every
too.
history book. I'm sorry, did I talk over somebody? I was just going to say, I think almost every history book is improved by a map and an index. And I'm sorry that I don't have an index or a map in this book. If I were doing it now, I would definitely do that. That's why I appreciate Ken Jessen from Loveland, who has published several books about Estes Park history. And he usually tries to include a map. I think I tried to include in some of my descriptions of things where they were, or how you could maybe locate it now in comparison to something else. But
I just want to say I thought that all the photographs of the downtown, the main area, were really, really interesting because I wasn't here at that time. And like the picture of the Safeway store when the service Sam's service turned into the Safeway. And then on page 78, is that the church shops now? That picture? Is that?
yes, yeah, that's the original church.
Yeah, because the shape looks the same, but of course the surroundings don't.
Right.
But these are lovely, a lovely group of pictures of the old different businesses and what they changed into sometimes. And there were lots of things were quite different than they are now, and that was really interesting.
Thanks.
Sybil, when you were putting the book together, did you have, did like kind of Arcadia walk you through like layout and design and things like that, or were you doing that all yourself?
They pretended to. They tried to help me with that. But I was pretty reluctant to let them have too much. And, you know, the vague clouds of memory are that the person who was initially my editor left Arcadia about halfway through the process. So then I had somebody who didn't really know what had gone on before and who was just glad to get it done. You know, it was one of those, are you done yet? Back to Kathleen's question about how do you know when to stop? It's when the publisher says, are you done yet? Which we talk about a lot in my just regular book group, about how sometimes it seems like they put a lot of effort into it and then all of a sudden they just go, oh, well, got to get it to the publisher, done, boom. So I think that was a part of what it was. I think the whole deal about history, as you well know, is that it's everything is a snapshot in time. And so you take whatever thing you can. And a lot of my friends who are my age go, well, that happened while I was alive. That's not really history. But we keep getting slapped in the face about like, oh yeah, the moon landing, which we all thought was yesterday, which may or may not have happened, is way in the past. And like I said about the Long Lake flood, you know, so.
Yeah, Sybil, I really love this book. It has a lot of pictures that I hadn't seen anywhere else. So you really collected all that. I was thinking like numbering the pictures, and then that could almost become your index at the back if you ever did it that way. But the book as it stands, as it is a really, really interesting book. And I know the issue about when do you quit, because I'm writing a book now and you never know when to stop. And yes, you have a pressure to get something out the door and get it published. So did you have readers other than, you know, the Arcadia people, like go through and, you know, local readers and stuff like that for your book?
Jack and Luli primarily, you know, because they had given me so much of the book. I showed them my earliest drafts. Yeah, and that was, you know, because I kind of thought I knew, I had been the local history librarian, and like, yeah, I probably know. I mean, people still sometimes come up to me and ask me things about stuff, which I may or may not know anything about. But I kind of had an idea that I was the one who knew about it. I didn't want to do the kind of in-depth research that Jim Pickering has done. You know, I didn't even if they had let me do that, I wouldn't have wanted to do a book like that, because that's really a long, hard slog of research and getting your facts right and all that. Looking at this for this today, I was like, oh my God, you know, there are places I could have put dates. There are places, as Kathleen said, I could have been a little bit better about the location of things so that people could look at those things. At one point, I know that Derek was kind of wandering around town after the Then and Now book. Derek and maybe Mick were trying to just document what's currently down there. And I wish that somebody would do that. I'm a really poor picture taker, so I don't know if I'm the one. But I wish somebody would just go downtown. And Mark Eigel is trying to do a little bit of that with the West Elkhorn walking tour, because he owns the taffy shop, so he's interested in that part of town. I do just have another collection of photographs from the 80s of, like, the town took pictures for the sign code when they were changing the sign codes. So I just got a collection of those that I'm maybe going to try to do something with. But even some of those, I'm like, I wonder where that was. I don't quite remember it either, even though I was here then.
Well, some people have done maps of different time frame, like 1920s or whatever. And I think Ken Jessen has done a map as well of different time frames. But you really need one that's
Yeah.
Those cost
Yeah,
money.
John Meisner has talked about that. We were talking sort of like an overlay thing. Like
Uh-huh.
you could start with 1905 and then just keep piling up what it is to that. And there must be some digital way to do that too. Like you could just do it as a website, but I'm really not technologically competent to do that. If you know somebody who is, I'd be happy to help with that.
Didn't I talk to you? I don't know. I talked to either Jessica or Michaela, one of the two of you, on about something like that. A table, kind of an interactive table that you could do overlays on of different times. And they do have such things. Microsoft has one, but it's kind of expensive. So
Yeah,
it's something to think
well,
about.
that's a really good idea for the museum. That would be a wonderful exhibit to have, an interactive exhibit, either on a table or you could maybe have it projected somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
When I
have,
was, when I was on Urban Renewal Board, we put together a series of pictures of before and after the various projects that Urban Renewal did. And all those files were archived by the town. I have no idea where they are, but they include a lot of pictures, and particularly the before and after. That was an early video. It wasn't professionally done very well, but there's some good pictures if they're even around anymore.
Yeah. Maybe the museum folks know where that might be, or Derek, or you guys, I don't know. But it would be
Would have
good.
to be the
I like that
town.
everybody likes the before and after pictures. And even when they're overlaid, you know, to kind of one fades into the other and you see the way it is now and the way it was in the past. It's kind of neat when you can do that.
Yeah, I almost wish that as I was going through Sybil's book that I could see like, well, you know, this used to be a hotel and now it's a Safeway kind of thing, you know, the before and after, or even in words like today, that, you know, it's this and that. It
The
would
only
have been
problem with
cool.
that is it changes.
Yeah, that's the
Today it's
problem.
one thing and next year it's something else.
Yeah, that's the problem with most of them. Some of the big ones would have been cool, like, you know, what happened to the giant hotel and what is it now? But it would have been very difficult. Like you say, the book would be out of date in 5 years.
Well, you can take it up a ways in time, like Bond Park over on page 13 in one of the early pictures. You could move that forward in time without too much trouble and show how the buildings changed and the streets and all that kind of stuff. But someone has to do it though.
Sybil, I really did like the captions under the pictures. I
Yeah,
thought they were really good and explained pretty much, except for, you know, these things we're talking about, location and dates maybe. But the captions were very, very good under all the pictures to explain. It wasn't just one little title, but nicely written. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Marty. I appreciate that. I was just thinking on page 95, for those of you who have the book, there's that picture of the football field with the, you know, whatever
right.
we call that behind it. And I should have, now that I'm looking at that, I think, oh, would have been smart to get a picture of Santa Claus up there, you know, when Santa's up there. And the other thing I like about some of those pictures, and that's in the arts and entertainment, I think, are the parade pictures. You know, we don't do parades as much as we did in the 50s and 60s. Like the street was closed down all the time for parades. Like the Shriners had a parade and the Western Airs had a parade, and every horse show that came to town had a parade. I also didn't have very much about Stanley Park or the horse shows. looking at this,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I really should have had a lot more stuff in here. Um, and I put a lot of effort. Looks like I have 5 pages about the Riverside, which nobody remembers because that's been a parking lot since 1970.
But
Right.
that was really
Um,
interesting to see, though.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Talking
that
about
was kind of one of
captions, I also read all of the credits. I really enjoyed, because I was expecting it all to be from the museum collection, and to see that it was from a lot of people's collections and a lot of postcards, which, like Bob was saying, there were a lot of pictures I had never seen before because they were held in homes and private collections. And I really enjoyed that. And then one other point was Luli and Jack Melton seem to have a big collection. And you put the last picture of the book of Jack Melton with a shovel, really not an important picture with him in the center. And I was wondering if you did that to honor him or something. What? Any comment on that?
Yeah, I suppose so. I felt like Luli and I've been friends since I was 7 and she was 5, and we went to the Y. Her family were big donors to the Y, and I was a latchkey kid and spent a lot of my time at the Y. And because they had donated so many of the pictures, they were letting me use all those pictures. They sold a lot of their collection to Bobby Heisterkamp for her postcard book. And I think there's still a fairly big collection of their stuff at the Y Museum. But that's the other thing about history, is it is so important for people to realize that they need to document what's in their picture collections, because some of them are really rare photos of whatever, how the town used to be or whatever. When Duke Simonia used to work at the Elizabeth Guild, and when somebody died, people would just bring in their piles of photo albums and stuff, and Duke was always snagging those to give to the museum or to go through and try to find out things. The other thing I think that you said, Kathleen, or maybe Bob, was the whole idea of when you take pictures of something, it's a good idea to have some defining feature in the background. Like if you can take a picture that includes the Stanley Hotel that will probably still be there, or Lumpy Ridge or something, so people can have kind of an idea about where that is, instead of just going, oh, look, here's a park with trees. I wonder where that, here's the river. Oh, imagine that. There was a river sometime. So.
Yes, I would second that as a historian. Please, just everybody, just take a quick look and just start writing names on the back of all of your photos. It's hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Even family photos.
Yes.
I, like you say, you get a big box of photos maybe when someone passes away and you're like, who's this? I don't remember. Like, that's me? What, are you kidding? Like, 1-year-old picture with a fishing rod or something. And yeah, it's so important to add names. Right now I'm in Lyons, I'm taking pictures of buildings and stores that, people don't understand that today will someday be history. And, if you don't take these pictures, the store was around for 10 years and now it's gone. And no one took a picture of it.
Yeah. Lyons is really undergoing some urban renewal, perhaps, or something, changes right there on the main drag. Every time I drive by there, I think, what used to be there? that whole, now that's going to be maybe a hotel or something. Yeah.
I've got a
So-
question for you from Lyons, about Lyons. What about that Indian shop that we have gone into in the past and is never open? Is that ever open?
Well, it's very rarely open, and I don't understand why. She has some real treasures in there.
She
And
does,
she
and
just,
I'd like to go again.
yeah, she just can't be bothered. And now she's older. I mean, it hasn't really been open in at least 5 years.
Is that
on a
right?
rare
Yeah.
occasion in the summer, she'll open it up, but now she's just kind of old and retired and can't be bothered standing there all day waiting for someone to show up.
Yeah.
Sybil, I have one more question for you. When you didn't have a date, like a specific date for a photo, would you try and kind of estimate a date, and how did you go about that?
Yeah, that's another thing that John Meisner, of course, is always on everybody about. Even in 2010, there wasn't as much information available on the internet, or maybe we didn't know how to get it as easily as now, or know how to compare things. So that's why there are some things were from my own memory, the 60s kind of things. But a lot of them, we were just relying on what we had collected at the museum before. There's a lot of maybe some date in some ways. And that's, I don't know, like I was looking at the trampoline picture, which is on page 110. That's right there at Fun City. And
Oh,
one
yeah.
of the reasons I even wanted to put that picture in was because that's such a big insurance risk now. I don't think you could have a trampoline center like that. Nobody I know ever broke their neck or anything there, but, that's behind what used to be the donut house, which in this picture is the gas station on the corner of Moraine and Craig's. And I don't know how Jack and Luli must have had a date, the 1966 date, but Dave Rusk, who has a little magazine called Hike Rocky, an online magazine, and he has a hiking book. He's been around for quite a while. I had known him for years, and when this book came out, he said, "Oh, Sybil, my parents owned that trampoline center." So sometimes when you get information from the most unlikely sources. So that's the other thing. I think all of us need to be talking a little more about our history and not getting that glazed bored look on our face when somebody else is saying, "I remember when that used to be something."
Question, Sybil, did you do a program on this when the book first came out, to get all the locals out and get their comments and stuff, things like that?
Yeah, I did. That's when Lois Smith was still having programs at the Ball Pate. So I did one up there. I did one at the museum, I think, and probably maybe at the library. Yeah. So, that's another thing. Like even this, it's just hard to get people to come out for anything and contribute to that, which is why, like Kathleen talking about doing oral histories, I'm glad that Derek has started that program up again, because every time I pick up the paper and see who died this week, I'm like, oh, there's another bit of somebody that could have told me something, and now they're gone.
We have on Facebook a page called something like Historic Photographs of Lions or something like that. And people will post on there like an old postcard they found or an old photograph they bought or something like that. And the reason I'm bringing it up is what you just said, Sybil, is that then people will tag onto it and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I worked there as a waitress, oh yeah, my father built the new front of it." And matter of fact, just this week, the new proposed hotel is a hot item in Lyons right now. And we put on there something about the hotel, and someone said, "Oh yeah, we own that place for 3 years and blah, blah, blah. And we have some old newspapers and we dug up and found this." And I'm like, "What? Like, why did nobody ever say that before?" And I'm like, "Okay, we have to talk." And so I have a phone call scheduled for Friday. So yeah, there's always little bits that you can discover.
Well, the museum has a Facebook page, but it isn't so much a community conversation as it is just a posting of Facebook stuff that the museum has. I mean, I don't know anywhere in town. There's a website called Old Estes. The West Elkhorn group, I think, has a Facebook page, but we don't have a community-wide conversation on history that I know of. Maybe you do, maybe somebody else does.
Bob, every
Yeah.
so
No,
often,
those-
sometimes it depends on what we post on our Facebook page. And I've noticed that if you get something within living memory, so if you get something within the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, people will jump on that post. But, you know, it just kind of depends because if we post something from like very early, you know, in the 1910s, 1920s, people certainly, I think, enjoy the photo, but it doesn't trigger that like individual memory. So I've really noticed the kind of different traffic we've had on each of those kinds of posts.
Yeah.
And some people will share theirs and sometimes they won't, but yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting kind of what people will grab onto in that space for sure.
Yeah, there's a Carriage Hills, you know, neighborhood Facebook page, and sometimes I'll put some stuff, old stuff out there, and people will go, "Oh yeah, I remember that," you know. But it has to be from about the 1960s on before you get too many memories. I suppose for in town, it might be the 1950s on. I rode on Casey's train when I was a kid, so when anybody posts Casey's train, I can relate to that one. But there, it gets less and less the further back in time you go.
Yeah, as anybody was reading, did you see a photo in here that triggered a personal memory for you, something like Casey's train?
Exactly. Casey's train was one. There's probably others. I should find all the others that in here that did. Well, the then and now, like the National Park Hotel, you know, triggered some memories. I don't know if your book had the Wax Museum in it, but somebody else had
Yeah, Ripley's.
yeah. And so I remember that. You know, I was a kid and we just walk up and down Elkhorn Avenue and do things that kids do. Go to the Indian Village and get some moccasins or something.
Yeah, for me, the Indian Village and the theater tower and the McDonald bookstore are
Mhm.
really the things. I mean, even back when, before I moved out here, you know, as a vacationer, I always remember those, like that tower. That's the one thing the one building that always stood out for me.
Yeah, did anybody else have kind of memories come back in looking at these photographs?
Plantation Restaurant, another one.
No.
Well, the one fun picture is on page 103. I thought this was the most fun picture in the whole book. It was people posing on the metal horse
Oh, yeah.
sculpture or something that was
Yeah,
part of
the
a
stuffed
photography
horse.
studio.
Yeah.
That was so fun and funny. Yeah.
We've talked
Yeah,
about,
that, you know, I was just gonna say the whole idea of what used to be entertainment, like Casey's train was the big entertainment. Now we have the mountain coaster.
Mhm.
You know, playing on that fountain in the park was a big thing for kids, and now maybe Cowboy Brad in the park is something that people do. It's a nostalgia trip, the whole thing.
so Sybil, you'd mentioned this at the very beginning, that there are other Images of America books kind of, well, across America, obviously, but there's one in Grand Lake and things like that. But not all small towns are so well documented, like Estes Park. What do you think it is, and this is to everybody, what do you think it is about Estes Park that makes it so photogenic, kind of obvious, besides the obvious natural beauty of where we live? But it looks like Sybil had a wealth of images to choose from. Why do you think Estes is so photogenic?
We have an eclectic mix of all kinds of buildings and at different points in time of history. So there's interest in all of the shots of any of the buildings in town because of that. You know, it's not like some ski towns where everything has a certain design and it kind of falls in and they're all quite a bit newer. Estes has history and an eclectic mix. So I think it's part of it's the oldness, the history, and part of it's the mix that we have. Anyway,
I
that's
think part of it is memory, the good memories. People who visit here,
yeah.
bring their kids vacation here, and many of them years later come and retire here. And so there's a lot of good memories, and people like to look at old pictures that remind them of, oh yeah, remember when we always used to get the taffy there,
As compared to some of the other mountain towns, ski towns, where the history kind of begins in 1960, when they began to really start skiing. And before that, they were little tiny, sometimes mining towns that had not the same connection to their current history. We have a lot of history, that goes quite a ways back in Estes.
Yeah, anybody else? What makes Estes so photogenic?
Well, a huge part of it is the park, that people
Sure.
came here because of the national park. And that's why there are so many, millions of people have come here in the last 100 years, at least 100 million. And like in the last, it's 4 million now. So maybe the last 20 years, you have to add double that. So that was the main thing for it. And I think Bob's really right that it isn't just like everything looks like Austria, like Vail or something. But because of the Y and Chile camp and a lot of the other kinds of camps that were here, or there were a lot of things in the 60s. There was a Blue Jeans orchestra. There were like a lot of young people in the 60s who came and worked here from all parts of the United States. I think that's why people like to look at pictures of that, or then even the things like the Coors Classic or the parades that I mentioned earlier, all those people who came to the horse shows. There's just a really wide range of people who spent a lot of time in Estes Park, and it's still so easy to get to from the Front Range or Kansas.
And some people are interested in the history because they came here years ago, as a child or something, and it's like, wasn't there a church here, or the church shops kind of thing, and or they remember when it was a coffee shop downstairs there, which I do. And so I talked to some of the tourists, not all of them, some just want to go flying through to get to the park or to get some gifts and trinkets, but other people are really interested. They want to know a little more, and I'm happy to talk to people. Although I haven't lived here like you have, Sybil, all those years.
Well, yeah. Are you like a ambassador then or something, Bob? Do you volunteer downtown, or do you just want to sit down on a bench downtown and talk to people?
That's kind of what I do.
Like, who is that crazy guy on the bench?
Yeah, I thought about doing the tours that they have, but I haven't had time yet to do that one. No, I've just been a history buff. I haven't been here. We bought a house in 2010 and we moved permanently in 2014. But I started talking to people like Jim Pickering and John Meisner and others, and that really stoked my interest in the history. And there's a lot of this book I would not know what it meant or what it was until I had been here a while and done a little of my own research, like the football field over by what was the high school there, which is now the parking lot. That means something now because I understand what was going on there. But it would, if I was just brand new in town, I might skip that over and not realize the significance of playing football right on there. So it's interesting, but that's how I got into this.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too. We had friends, we moved here from Michigan 17 years ago. And we had friends who come most every year, and not last year, of course, but they love to come out here in the winter, and people back in Michigan say, what are you doing going to Estes Park for in the winter when you could go to Florida like the rest of us do? Because they are so many snowbirds from Michigan go to Florida. But they love coming out here, and what do they do while they're here? They're out there with their cameras and their phones, and oh, it's such a beautiful day. I'm going to drive in the park and just take pictures. And, oh, I'm going to go downtown. Oh, I want to see that new women's monument and get some pictures. And they're just, and they're our age, so they're not young, but they've taken pictures every year. And every year they come back. Oh, maybe we can get our Christmas card picture here. Would you take it for us? And they're all excited. And I think a lot of people who come over and over have that kind of a way about them, and they do, and we get a lot of photographs taken because people want the memories of how it was 10 years ago when I was here, and now look how it's changed, or oh, it's just the same, one or the other. We're always hearing, and it's so much fun to go with them because they see it with a little different eye than since we've lived here this long. We appreciate and love every minute and everywhere we go and every day that we do something the same that we did before. It's always different and it's always wonderful. But to have somebody else come who's fresher at it, it just, it's a real joy. It's a lot of fun. And I think a lot of people have that kind of attitude.
Mhm.
We did a study.
Pretty busy. It's pretty
on
busy in
who
wintertime.
come-
Pretty busy in wintertime now. No longer does the town close up after Labor Day like I've been told it did and board up the stores and everything. Nothing like that anymore.
No. You know
We
that
did
from
a
working
study
in the
of
park.
who is it that comes? Are they coming primarily to be in Estes, or are they coming primarily to be at the park? And it was a very interesting picture that we learned about the town and the park. There are those who would come to do one or the other, to come to Estes to enjoy what was here, to shop. If they were going to be here 2 days, they would take a visit through the park, but it would be short. The other large group of people who came to the park, and Estes was a place to stop and get a trinket or to get something to eat, but their interest was the national park and the outdoors. And we saw that over the time I was involved, beginning to change, that more and more of the visitors were Front Range people who were up here primarily on weekends or for day trips. And the people from the Midwest, which had been the dominant group, those numbers were going down pretty quickly during this would have been in the 80s, end of the 80s, early 90s when we did this study. And I would bet now, if we were to do a study, that the numbers would be predominantly Front Range people, just numerically.
Front Range in Texas.
Yeah, well, the
People in
Texans,
And
Texas-
Nebraska.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
in Texas think it's their backyard.
a lot of the Texas people that we were able to identify were looking for investments either for themselves or to have a business of some kind. But that wasn't a very large number. The people who own property, that's a large number. But as visitors, that wasn't as large as we had expected.
Interesting. I'm going to go back a little bit as Ms. DeYoung was just leading beautifully into my next question about taking photographs. So what do you think it is that makes photographs so special? Like Sybil had kind of mentioned, they're truly a snapshot in time. Why do you think people love to take photographs? Why do you think people love to look at photographs? What is it about like the form of the photograph that you think makes it so special?
I think remembering. I'm always accused by my husband of taking way too many photographs, especially of elk. But just,
Yeah.
I have too many photo albums. I'm not happy with just having them on the computer or, in some way like that, but I need the physical picture. And I love to page through photographs. And during COVID, it was a wonderful thing when we couldn't go anywhere to get out. Oh, let's see the album from when we went to such and such a place or whatever. And we would sit in the evening and just look through one of our photo albums from a trip. And it gave us, oh, well, we can't go on a trip today, this year, but we did in such and such a time. And I think the memories are just worth it. Now, they might not be worth to the next generation. I don't see my son or my daughter being interested in all the photographs that I have, maybe the family ones over the years of their family and so on. But other than that, probably not. But for me, they're very important.
And Marty, for that, do they have a million photographs on their phones? You know, like younger
Oh,
people now
yes.
take all kinds of pictures on their phones
Yeah.
and keep them. I love that you mentioned that about the elk, because in looking at this book, you know, on page 85, I have one picture of deer in front of, you know, what used to be the town hall or the post office. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty silly, Sybil, that none of these pictures are of the animals, which I would say 80% of the people who come here
They
just
want
to see the animals.
That's
They don't
right.
want to buy a trinket or go do anything. The animals are the trees in the fall, or sometimes the snow is what people are looking for. I think the whole thing about a picture is you can put yourself back in that picture, whether it's you as a young person or you in Costa Rica or wherever your trip took you. That whole memory thing, and of course that's an old person thing too. The older you get, the more you start thinking about what you used to do or what brought you joy. That
I kind of have always liked to take more artistic pictures. And I remember when I was young, like in my 20s, I showed my mother photos that I'd taken on a vacation. And she looked through and she said, well, who are the people? Because in my time, at that time, everyone I knew, all the pictures were photos of people. Like, come over here, let's stand together, come over here, let's take this picture, go over there, stand by that statue, I'll take your picture. And every picture my mom had was of people, not necessarily in a great fancy location. And so I was kind of the rebel and wanted to take the pretty pictures. And I mean, that's always a personal challenge to me, to take just the perfect picture. Like, trying to take a picture of a antique building in Mexico, like Tolan. And I'm like, I'm going to wait until every person has walked away. Can you imagine? I had to stand there for an hour, just to get the perfect picture. But yeah, and I met a man once on one place, and he's like, I don't understand why people take pictures. I just absorb it into me. I refuse to take pictures. And I'm thinking, you are one in a million, like, who was it? Someone was just saying about, oh yeah, the Michigan people come and just photos, and then they come back and they still take more photos. We're just like, that's our generation. And I'm sorry to see that they keep them on their phone, and it's almost impossible to really share them or to call up a particular memory. And it's like too many, like dozens of pictures, where back when we had a roll of film that was 24, each picture was precious. We now they'll take 24 pictures of one spot or whatever. So it's a different generation.
I think sometimes there's a surprise factor. When I was first moved out here, somebody said, there's a swimming pool back here, behind this, where it was on Riverside there. And then I look here, and this was about probably a year or two after we moved here. Oh, yeah, there was a swimming pool, that whole complex there on Riverside Park. So you're documenting history, and pictures like that kind of go, oh, wow, surprise factor in some of those pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got surprises, we've got great nostalgia, we've got memory making. Yeah, photos really do it all, don't they?
But it's a book that documents our history, not one that is like landscapes, and that kind of stuff. We have coffee table books all over the place that are like that. This one is our history.
So my question to you all is, if you had to take, I'm going to challenge you and say one photo of town today, this maybe not today because it's snowing, but when the weather is nice, if you had to take one photo of Estes Park today, what photo would you take? I'll let you think about it.
I think the one that comes to mind immediately would be Elkin Bond Park.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Bond Park is really a treasure. But like I said earlier, the tower at the movie theater is a thing that stood out for me in all the years. That was the one thing I always remembered above anything else. So if I were to take a picture representative of Estes, it would be that. If I took a personal picture that, I would want to remember, I think actually the Riverwalk is maybe my favorite, behind like the McDonald bookstore area and along there. That's a favorite spot.
Yeah, and compare that with what it looked like before urban renewal happened, how that area was used or abused. I would want an aerial picture, probably either from the west end of town where so many photographs are taken, or from up by the Birch Ruins. And I've taken many from Birch Ruins, but comparing that to past pictures, that kind of thing.
I would go with that with Bob, because you can get Long's Peak in the background
Sure.
from the Birch Ruins. You can see the tower, the Park Theater Tower. You can see Bond Park. You can see Long's Peak. I went to see a fairly horrible movie this week called Blacklight. And part of the set decoration was a contemporary art photograph of Long's Peak. They were like walking through an apartment and there was that on the wall. And I was like, woo! Of course, I was the only person in the theater, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah, I was up by the Birch Ruins once.
It's always fun to see. I think that's a lot of why some of us
Yeah.
are still here, because whatever the lure of Long's Peak is.
Things are still changing, and you can see that even from 5 years ago, that sort of thing, by taking those kind of pictures. I was up by the Birch Ruins in an early evening one time with some photographers that knew what they were doing. And so we took some with like the glow of the town lights and then the mountains in the background. It was really pretty. I've seen those on postcards, so I managed to get a pretty good one of that. And that's really captures the mountain town and in the winter time, I think. So.
I'd have a hard time of taking a picture anywhere in town that didn't include Long's Peak. I mean, that's what drew us here, why we're here. We love
Sure.
it, and it would have to be in the picture. So
It's
Birch
fun.
Ruins sounds like a good place to do that.
It's funny because when people come to visit me, I say, well, when you get off the plane, just look for the tallest snow-capped mountain over in the northwest and just keep driving towards it.
I'm interested that no one's mentioned the Stanley or something to get in the picture. Because what I hear when I was working at the park, the Stanley is sort of the symbol from those coming from other parts of even the world that heard about the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. So those two thoughts, those two images seem to be what people remember, but those of us who are here, we don't mention the Stanley that often.
Mhm. I
I
agree.
was thinking of it, but I'd rather see Long's Peak than
Yeah.
the Stanley.
Right.
You can take Long's Peak from the Stanley, stand on the steps.
You sure could.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of, the Stanley is always, for me as someone who is fairly recent to Estes, the Stanley and Longs, there are certain those, we've kind of talked about it, those kind of key, like kind of touchstones to orient yourself within a photograph. And because the Stanley has been here so long, like it kind of shows up in the background over here, or it's over here. And it's not necessarily like the main focus of the image, but it's always a good kind of spot to orient yourself, right? Like the Stanley, the Park Theater Tower, Longs Peak, Lumpy Ridge, those seem to be some key features.
I guess you'd call them iconic features of Estes Park and the environs.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. The Stanley, I've had more people ask me about the Stanley than any other thing in Estes Park.
Sure. So as you were reading and looking at images, was there a particular image that you had never seen before that had surprised you, or a story or caption that you didn't know about at all and you were surprised to see documented?
Well, there's lots of them. I really can't stop. I mentioned the Riverside Park and the swimming pool when I first moved here. I had heard that there was such a thing, and so I was surprised to see it. But there are many pictures in here that don't appear anywhere else that I've seen, because they came from different people's collections as well as the museum. So I'd have a hard time picking out one.
Yeah, anybody else? Were you surprised, or was there something, a particular image that stood out to you, maybe a view that you had never seen before?
Well, I think we've covered some of them, like Kathleen asked about that picture of Jack just
Sure.
looking down the main street, or some of the other, the one thing that I feel badly about that I should have done a better caption is on page 111. It's in the weather one, and it's actually Dave Sterling, who was looking at his car buried in snow. And so this time of the year, I'm always thinking about that, like, oh, I used to think, why did everybody go to Arizona in the winter? Like when Bob Levitt mentioned, that the town used to shut up and people were gone.
This guy right
And you
here.
look at that picture and just go, oh,
Oh, I
right. I
know.
mean, for people from Michigan or even Nebraska, that's like not that much snow. But so I do wish
So
that I
often we
had,
get
had
dumped.
made a better caption for that.
Every so often we get dumped
Because
on.
now that's, yeah. The store next door is Simply Christmas now. It used to be the Log Cabin Waffle Shop. And that National Park Outfitting Company is a building that's still there. But now I think it's Mocha Angelo's coffee
Right.
shop.
Right.
Yeah.
The pictures of Casey's train on 104 and 105 triggered memories because I rode on it when I was a kid. We came out here and we stayed in the Meeker Park cabins, and then we came down to Estes once or twice, and we hiked everywhere else. But I always remember riding on Casey's train. It was over by the Thompson River for a while, I think, where Kind Coffee is now, and then it moved. Yeah. So triggered memories.
Going back to that picture on 111 of the snow in front of the store, I looked at that picture and then I read the caption, and it said, this eventually snow falls like this made this person close their business or leave town. And I'm like, well, what's the big deal? And then I looked, and there's two people there in the corner that I didn't notice at first. And the snow is like waist deep. And I'm like, oh, okay, that is a lot of snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the blizzard of 1913.
Yeah. It's nice to have those folks for scale, right? Because sometimes it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
We-
Otherwise,
we
I would
haven't
have
had-
been like, so what's the big deal? But yeah.
We haven't had blizzards like that since we moved here. But in 2003, a few years before we moved here, there was 4 feet of snow.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, because we were here with a busload of college kids, at the Y, and we were supposed to be there one night, and we were there for 3 nights because of the storm. It
And
was
sometimes,
very exciting to be.
sometimes
there
late
again.
snows, like we had one in 2017 and
Yeah,
in
that was in March.
Yeah.
At that 2003.
the 2017, we had another one. 30 inches, but it came on May 20th. And so lots of events got canceled because they were not expecting it.
But it went away quickly.
Yeah,
In March, it didn't go away so quickly.
coming from Nebraska, I adjusted my definition of big snow. And I discovered that people here go out and go to their meetings and do everything unless it gets really deep, like over a foot of snow coming down.
Well,
right.
it's coming down right now.
Yeah, I think we're in for it today even.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one final question for the group. So specifically, the book did a great job in showing changes, obviously throughout town for sure, but Elkhorn Avenue really saw a lot of changes over time. We saw, like Sybil had mentioned, it starts with like one building and then we end up with what we have today. What do you think is one of the largest changes that we've seen on Elkhorn over time?
Well, all of those giant hotels are gone.
Yeah. They've changed and they've morphed into something else. Cars were a lot older. It would be the changes of the businesses that, there were gas stations more, there were livery stables, depending on how far back you go. And coming into town, you've got one of those pictures, Sybil, that shows, there was really just open space coming in on Highway 34 and maybe a horse pasture or two. And that was about it. So it's grown along Elkhorn and changed hands many times.
I think what has really changed Estes downtown was the center of activity with some residential and activity areas, hiking and stuff. But that's not true anymore. Downtown is primarily a tourist area. And then the community services have spread all around that, along the major routes.
Yeah, the high school was downtown, so we had all that too.
I don't know your name, the Audrey family. I wanted to say thank you for joining us because you really added new depth to our discussion with all your knowledge about the government planning and views. Thanks.
Well, thank you. It's been enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes along Elkhorn being involved with urban renewal and things like that.
I got a chance to wear 2 hats. I did a lot of the statistics and stuff for the park as a ranger, and then being involved in urban renewal, I could see it from both perspectives. And it was like 2 different worlds. I don't think that's changed.
All right. Anybody else? Final thoughts, questions? Sybil, do you have anything you want to close with? Anybody have questions for Sybil?
Just one thing I guess I should say, there is a group in town called Old Timers. And this is people that get together for breakfast on the 2nd and 4th Saturdays at 8:30 at the Bighorn is where we're meeting now. And sometimes it's 6 of us and sometimes it's 20 or 30 of us. And people usually talk about what they remember about the old times. And when that group started, Andy Anderson, who owned Wonderview Cottages and also the Jolly Jug liquor store, said you had to have lived here in the 50s or be related to somebody who lived here in the 50s. So now Bernie Petrosine and I and Greg Daniels, the children of those people, are the old timers. But if anybody would ever want to come to that, you would be more than welcome.
2nd and 4th
And
Saturdays.
bring your own ideas.
2nd and 4th Saturday, you said?
Saturdays, yeah, at 8:30, or no, I'm sorry, not 8:30. God, nobody gets up at 8:30. 9 o'clock at the
Nine-
Bighorn.
9 o'clock, okay. Yeah, I might
9
do
o'clock
that.
at the Bighorn. Yeah, in the back room. And Ernie Petrosine, when it started, somebody always had a bad joke, like, what do you call a grizzly with no teeth? Gummy bear. And sometimes they were worse jokes than that. But then he likes to have people come and talk about what they remember. And, as I said earlier, yesterday is history. So it doesn't matter if you were here in the 50s or visited in the 50s or came here in 2021.
Yeah.
Or yesterday.
Sometimes I wish there were as many pictures of the rest of the Estes Valley as there are of downtown Estes Park. Because I'm researching the southern Estes Valley, and there just isn't this kind of quantity, or else they're in private hands and not made available to people. But
well, yeah, when I worked at the library, people would come in and say, well, I just bought this house, and do you have any pictures? And that kind of goes back to what Kathleen said about when we only had a roll of film, we weren't going to take pictures of our living room.
right.
Now a lot of people take pictures for insurance or whatever. So there might be more interior shots or even exterior shots of things,
Mm-hmm.
people's homes, but
Yeah.
that could be a whole nother project for somebody, some realtor.
I think there's another project that would help to tell the story of the Estes Valley, and that is transportation, how people got here. I mean, it might have been that the primary access was coming up what is now Route 7 and coming in through Moraine Park and then into what is downtown Estes. What really changed that was F.O. Stanley. But before that, the development was coming from pretty much the Route 7 area. You couldn't get up 34 and 36. That hadn't really developed very much. And there was going to
It was
be a
a toll
railroad
road.
plans.
Mhm.
All of that would have come in down Route 7 and into Moraine Park. And the railroads,
Yeah.
several railroads had already gotten permission for building lines into town. So I think another focus, which would be a very different picture of Estes, would be transportation.
Mm-hmm. That brings Lions into the picture too, because all the Stanley steamers would park down there at the railhead and then bring people up. In that case, by the well, what is today Route 36, although it wasn't quite back then, but that route.
Yeah, we had the trains bring people to Lyons, and then from Lyons, they took a lot of the Stanley steamers up because they were really the only cars that could take that road and did it pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
And then it
before
was
that,
developed, then Highway 36 was developed a lot in thanks to F.O. Stanley, because he wanted to bring the tourists to the town. And they offered at first to do Highway 34, and there wasn't as much support. And so then Lucky Lions got the road done.
the first railroad destination to get to Estes was Ward. You could buy a ticket from Chicago to Estes Park, and that included transportation from Ward into Estes. And Stanley changed the balance because he chose not to do that.
Mm-hmm. And the main road from Ward at that time, it did not go down Highway 7 today. That was built in the 30s. So it would have been what was called the Fish Creek Road or the Lambs Road that went in front of the Baldpate Inn and then came down more or less where the Homer Rouse Trail is today. And that's how they got in to town from the south until the 1930s when they built the final section of the Highway 7 we know today.
Went by the old tea house, which was a destination for residents then on weekends. On Sunday after church, a large number of people would go to the the tea house on that route.
Oh, yeah, the Wigwam Tea Room you're
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah.
And,
That was
and I
good.
just have to say that that's not what Bob said. Bob was talking about going in front of the ball pit, but the
Yeah.
wigwam was down towards the Y.
Yeah, it went
So
down
they
the
came, they
by
came
the
across
Aspen
the
Brook,
top, Aspen Brook,
by
right?
the Aspen Brook, right,
And-
and then down that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a
probably-
really good book by, there's a good book by Sylvia Pedham, Bob. I don't know if you have that. I think it's called either along the South St. Vrain or from Ward to Estes Park or something. Sylvia Pedham was a newspaper writer and
Okay.
historian from Boulder.
Mhm.
And
I don't
that's
have it, but I'll write it
excellent
down.
book about that. Yeah. Pettem is her
Pe-
last name.
Spell that last name
P
again?
Pettem.
Okay,
M as in me. Yeah, Sylvia is her first name. I don't know if the library still has a copy, but you should be able to get it on Interlibrary Loan.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so yeah.
friends.
Are
Any
you, are
other-
you ready to say, what are we gonna choose?
Yeah, should we choose some books? Do we have any? I just want to make sure we've got final thoughts and questions about Sybil's book. I think we've covered it, guys. But does anybody have any final
Yeah.
questions? No? All right. Cool. Well, I have a list of books. Oh, here, I'm going to stop recording. All right. Maybe I won't.